You might imagine the medieval farm as a place of constant toil and harsh conditions, and you would not be entirely wrong, but the reality of sleep in such a place was far more complex and far more quiet than the stories often suggest. Picture yourself not as a noble or a knight, but as one of the countless anonymous figures who worked the land from before dawn until after dusk, whose name appears in no chronicle, whose face was never painted, yet whose labor fed the villages and towns that surrounded the manor house. You are a peasant farmer in the year 1324, somewhere in the rolling countryside of England, though the specifics of geography matter less than the rhythm of the days and the quality of the rest that comes when the body has been emptied of energy by honest work. The sun has set nearly 2 hours ago, and the sky outside the small window of your cottage has faded from the deep amber of sunset to a darkness so complete that it seems to press against the glassless opening like a soft blanket. You do not have glass in your window, of course. Instead, a piece of oiled linen has been stretched across the rough wooden frame to keep out the worst of the wind while still allowing some air to circulate. The linen moves slightly with each breath of night breeze, and you can smell the faint odor of the linseed oil that was used to treat it, a smell that has become so familiar over the years that you no longer notice it unless you make a conscious effort to attend to it. It is a smell of preservation, of making do, of taking materials that the land provides and coaxing them into service through patience and repetitive labor. Your cottage is small, perhaps no more than 20 feet in length and 15 in width, constructed from a timber frame filled with wattle and daub. The wattle, which you helped to weave yourself from hazel branches during the previous winter, when the sap was down and the wood was flexible, forms a lattice between the upright posts. Over this lattice, you and your family applied the daub, a mixture of wet soil, clay, sand, animal dung, and straw, working it into the gaps with your hands until the walls were thick enough to provide some insulation against the cold. The daub has dried now to a color somewhere between gray and brown, and in places where the mixture was not perfectly uniform, you can see individual strands of straw catching the light from the small fire that burns in the center of the single room. The fire is the only source of heat and light, and it has been banked for the night, covered with a layer of ash to keep the embers alive until morning without requiring fresh fuel. The glow that remains is minimal, casting long shadows that seem to breathe with the movement of the flames beneath their covering. You are preparing for sleep, though the concept of preparation is different here than it would be centuries later. There is no change of clothing into something designed specifically for rest, for you possess only the garments you wear during the day, and perhaps one other set for Sundays or special occasions. Your tunic, woven from coarse wool that still carries the faint lanolin smell of the sheep it came from, has grown soft with age and repeated washing in the stream. The wool retains heat even when damp, which is fortunate because the air inside the cottage carries moisture from the breath of the 4 people who sleep here, from the cooking that was done earlier, from the very soil upon which the structure is built. The floor is not floorboards as you might know them, but beaten earth, covered in places with rushes that were harvested from the marshy ground near the river and strewn about to provide some cushioning and to absorb the spills and debris of daily life. Those rushes have been down for 2 months now, and they carry the accumulated scent of food scraps, of foot traffic, of the dog that sleeps near the door, of the smoke that has no proper chimney to escape through, but instead finds its way through gaps in the thatch or simply settles in the upper reaches of the room until it slowly seeps out into the night. The thatch above you is perhaps the most important element of your shelter, and you have checked it periodically throughout the autumn to ensure that no gaps have formed where the straw bundles might have shifted. Thatching is a specialized skill, one that you pay for when it is needed every 15 or 20 years, but the maintenance between those times falls to you. The straw was harvested from your own fields, the long stalks of wheat or rye that remained after the grain had been threshed and winnowed. You tied them into bundles with twine made from the inner bark of lime trees, working with the rhythmic motion that comes from years of repetition, your hands knowing the task without requiring direction from your conscious mind. The thatch sheds rain well when it is properly maintained, the water running down the steep angle of the roof and dripping from the eaves rather than soaking through to the interior. But thatch also harbors insects and mice, and the occasional bird that finds its way in through a gap and cannot easily find its way out. The sounds of these creatures become part of the nighttime symphony, the scurrying of tiny feet across the straw above, the occasional rustle that tells you something is moving in the darkness overhead. You have learned not to mind these sounds, or rather to find in them a reassurance that the roof is intact enough to support life, that the shelter you have built continues to function as intended. Your bed, if it can be called that, is a simple wooden frame raised slightly off the damp earth floor, constructed from rough planks that were split rather than sawn. showing the irregular grain of the oak from which they came. Upon this frame lies your mattress, though again the word carries connotations that do not match the reality. What you sleep upon is a large sack made from sturdy hemp cloth, filled with straw that was changed last at the harvest festival 3 months ago. The straw has been compressed by your weight over those months, compacted into a surface that is firm rather than soft, though still yielding enough to accommodate the contours of your body. You can smell the straw, a dry grassy smell that has begun to take on notes of mildew from the moisture of your breath and sweat that has seeped into it over time. It is not unpleasant exactly, but it is earthy, organic, a reminder that you sleep upon the processed remains of the same fields you worked during the day. The straw rustles when you move, a sound like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones, and this sound becomes part of the auditory landscape of your rest. You lie down now, pulling over yourself a blanket woven from wool, heavy and dense, the natural oils in the fiber making it somewhat resistant to water, though not entirely proof against a heavy rain should the thatch fail. The blanket has been repaired many times, the holes that appeared worn into it by use being darned with yarn of a slightly different color, so that the surface shows a pattern of patches that map the history of its service. It is warm though, and that is what matters as the temperature drops in the hours before dawn. You share this sleeping space with your spouse, with your youngest child who is not yet old enough to sleep in the loft, and with the knowledge that the animals you depend upon for survival are just on the other side of the wattle partition that divides the cottage into human and livestock quarters. The cow, the pig, the chickens, they all generate heat and they all generate smell, and both of these elements penetrate the barrier between you, reminding you even in rest of the interdependence that defines your existence. The darkness is complete now, the fire having subsided to a mere pulse of warmth, and the faintest red glow visible through the ash. You can hear the breathing of your family members, the deeper rhythm of your spouse, the lighter, quicker breaths of the child, and beyond them the larger, slower breath of the cow as it stands in its stall, chewing cud with the methodical patience of a creature that knows nothing of clocks or schedules. The smell of the animals is stronger in the darkness, the ammonia from the chicken droppings, the sweet heavy scent of the cow's hide, the particular musk of the pig, all blending with the smoke and the straw and the damp earth to create an olfactory environment that would be overwhelming to a modern nose, but which you experience as neutral, as simply the smell of home, of safety, of the place where you're allowed to stop moving for a few hours before the demands of survival begin again. You might think that sleep comes easily to those who labor hard, and there is truth in this. But the sleep of the medieval farmer is not the continuous unbroken rest that modern ideal suggests. You will wake several times in the night, as almost all people did, before the invention of artificial lighting and the restructuring of social time that accompanied industrialization. The first sleep, as it will come to be called by those who study such patterns centuries later, lasts perhaps 4 hours, from the time you lay down shortly after dark until sometime around midnight. During this period, you descend into the deep restorative phases of rest, your body repairing the damage done by the day's labor, your mind processing the experiences of threshing grain, or repairing fences, or spreading manure on the fields that will grow next year's crop. The straw beneath you compresses further as you lie upon it, the wool of your tunic growing warm with your body heat, the blanket creating a microclimate of warmth that contrasts with the chill air of the cottage interior. When you wake, it is not with the jolt of an alarm or the panic of having overslept, but with a gentle surfacing into consciousness, a recognition that you are awake without any particular urgency to become active. This is the watch, the period between sleeps that was once universal and is now largely forgotten. You lie still, listening to the sounds of the night outside your walls. An owl calls from the wood at the edge of your clearing, its hoot carrying clearly in the cold air. Something moves in the undergrowth, perhaps a fox hunting for the mice that thrive in the grain stores, perhaps a badger making its nocturnal rounds. The wind has shifted slightly, and you can hear it moving through the bare branches of the oak tree that stands 20 yards from your door, a sound like distant water, like the breathing of the land itself. You do not light a candle, for candles are precious, made from tallow that requires rendering fat from the animals you slaughter, and they are needed for occasions when light is essential for work, not for mere comfort during the night watch. Instead, you simply exist in the darkness, your eyes open but seeing nothing, your mind drifting in that peculiar state that is neither fully awake nor fully asleep, a liminal consciousness that allows for reflection without the sharp edges of analytical thought. Some nights during this watch, you might rise to relieve yourself, stepping out into the darkness to use the privy pit dug behind the cottage, feeling the cold air on your face and the shock of it in your lungs, smelling the frost that is forming on the grass, hearing the absolute silence that falls when you stop moving, a silence so complete that it seems to have texture and weight. Other nights you remain in your straw nest, simply being present in the darkness, perhaps praying the prayers you learned as a child, perhaps thinking of nothing at all, allowing your mind to float free from the concerns of crops and weather, and the demands of the Lord whose land you work in exchange for this protection and this patch of earth to call your own. The watch lasts perhaps an hour, sometimes less, sometimes more, until the weight of sleep begins to press upon you again, and you allow yourself to sink back into the straw, to pull the blanket more closely around your shoulders, to let your breathing slow and deepen once more. The second sleep is different from the first, lighter, more prone to dreams, more easily interrupted by the sounds of the animals or the movements of your bedfellows. It is during this period, in the hours before dawn, that your mind creates the narratives that mix memory and imagination, that place you in scenarios impossible in waking life, that process the fears and hopes you cannot afford to examine during the day when there is work to be done. You dream of the harvest, of the grain standing golden and heavy, of the ease of abundance, but also of the hailstorm that came 3 years ago and destroyed everything, of the hunger that followed, of the cold that seemed to penetrate to the bone and stay there for months. These dreams do not wake you, for you have learned to accommodate them, to let them flow through your sleeping mind like water through a stream bed, shaping the channel but not stopping the current. The first hint of dawn does not come through your oiled linen window, for the east faces away from your door, but you sense it nonetheless, a subtle change in the quality of the darkness, a lessening of the weight of night, a distant birdsong that begins before there is any light to see by. The rooster in your chicken coop has not yet crowed, but he will soon, and that sound will mark the end of your rest, whether you feel ready to rise or not. The cow has been standing all night, as cows do, but now you can hear her shifting in her stall, anticipating the milking that must come before anything else can be done. The fire has died to cold ash, and the temperature inside the cottage has dropped to match the outside, your breath now visible in faint clouds above your face when you open your eyes to the grayness that is slowly replacing the black. You rise not with a groan but with a sigh, the sound of acceptance, of the body acknowledging that rest is over and labor must resume. The straw of your mattress crackles as you push yourself upright, your joints stiff from the cold and from the dampness that seeps into everything during the winter months. Your spouse is already moving, banking the fire, adding the small amount of fuel that will bring it back to life, placing the pot of water that will become the morning's pottage over the gradually building heat. The child sleeps still, for children are allowed to rest until the fire is warm and the immediate tasks of animal care have been completed. You pull on your shoes, simple constructions of leather wrapped around wooden soles, feeling the familiar pressure of the straps across your instep, the slight discomfort of the hard bottom against feet that have never known cushioning. You wrap a cloak around your shoulders, rough wool that sheds some water and blocks some wind, and you step out into the half-light of the farmyard. The air is cold enough to make your eyes water, carrying the smell of the earth, of the manure pile, of the frost that has settled on everything exposed to the sky. The thatch of your cottage is white with it, the individual straws standing out in sharp relief against the slowly lightening sky. You can see your breath in clouds before you, and you can hear the sounds of other cottages awakening around you, the lowing of cattle, the calls of farmers to one another as they begin the morning's work. There is no privacy in this life, no solitude except in the depths of the night, and even then you are surrounded by family and animals and the constant presence of the land itself. You make your way to the cowshed, your feet knowing the path even in the dim light, and you begin the milking that will provide the basis for your breakfast, for the cheese that will see you through the winter, for the small amount of butter that represents one of the few luxuries available to you. The milk is warm in your hands as you direct the streams into the wooden pail, the rhythmic sound of it striking the bottom becoming a meditation, a moment of mechanical action that requires just enough attention to keep your mind from wandering, but not enough to demand full concentration. The cow stands patiently, her hide warm and slightly damp where your forehead presses against her flank for leverage, her smell surrounding you, the smell of the barn, of the hay that serves as her bedding and her food, of the manure that will be collected and spread on the fields to ensure next year's growth. You can hear the other animals stirring, the chickens beginning to murmur in their coop, the pig grunting in its sty as it senses the approach of the morning feeding. These sounds are your alarm clock, your schedule, your timekeeper, more reliable than any sundial or hourglass. When the milking is done, you carry the pail back to the cottage where the fire has finally established itself and the pottage is beginning to bubble. The grain that forms its base was ground by the quern stone that sits in the corner of the room, a task that falls to the women of the household when they are not engaged in other labor. The repetitive turning of the upper stone against the lower, reducing the hard kernels to flour that can be cooked into something digestible. The pottage contains what is available, perhaps some dried peas that were stored from the summer garden, perhaps a bit of salt pork. If the slaughtering has been done recently, perhaps just the grain and water, and whatever herbs can be gathered from the frozen garden. It is not flavorful by modern standards, but it is hot, and it is filling, and it provides the energy needed for the day's work ahead. You eat quickly, for the animals must be fed and the day's tasks begun while there is light to work by. The winter days are short, and the work that can be done outdoors is limited by the cold and the frequent rain or snow. There are fences to check and repair, wood to be gathered for the fire, perhaps the threshing of grain that was stored in the sheaves after harvest and now must be processed before the spring planting demands all available labor. The tools you use are simple, made of wood and iron, requiring constant maintenance, the handles smoothed by years of use, the blades sharpened on stones that are kept for that purpose. You know these tools as extensions of your own body, the weight and balance of the flail you use for threshing, the heft of the axe for splitting firewood, the particular swing required to drive a fence post into ground that grows harder as the frost penetrates deeper. The day progresses in cycles of labor and brief rest, the body warming with movement and cooling when still, the mind occupied with the immediate demands of the task at hand. You do not think of the future in abstract terms, for the future is the next season, the next harvest, the next winter that must be prepared for. You do not think of the past except as it informs the present, the knowledge passed down through generations of how to read the weather, how to treat the soil, how to care for the animals that depend upon you as you depend upon them. The monastery bells that ring from the village 2 miles away mark the canonical hours, providing a structure to the day that is more religious than practical, though you stop your work when you hear them and offer the prayers expected of a good Christian, not because you feel particularly pious at that moment, but because the ritual is part of the rhythm, part of the acceptance of a place in a larger order that extends beyond the boundaries of your farm and your lifetime. As the afternoon fades into evening, you begin the tasks that prepare for the night to come. The animals are secured, the cow brought into the shed where she will spend the night, the chickens closed in their coop against the foxes, the pig given its final meal of the day. You gather what fuel you can for the fire, the wood that was split earlier in the season now seasoned and dry enough to burn with minimal smoke, the peat that was cut from the bog and dried in the sun providing a slower, steadier heat. The water is fetched from the well, the pottage is prepared for the evening meal, the simple tools of your existence are put in their places so that they can be found in the morning without the waste of precious light searching for them. The darkness falls as it always does, gradually then suddenly, the last light lingering in the west for what seems like hours then disappearing in moments. You eat the evening meal with your family, the same simple food that sustained you at breakfast, perhaps with the addition of a bit of cheese or a piece of bread if the baking was done recently. There is little conversation, for there is little to say that has not been said before, and the energy for social interaction has been spent in the labor of the day. You sit by the fire for a brief time, mending perhaps, or simply sitting, watching the flames, feeling the warmth on your face while your back remains cold from the draft that finds its way through the walls no matter how well they were constructed. When you rise to prepare for sleep, you are following a pattern that is as old as your memory, a sequence of actions that requires no decision, no thought, simply the body moving through the established choreography of rest. You check the thatch one final time, listening for the sounds of animals in the roof, smelling for the smoke that would indicate a spark has escaped the fire, feeling with your hands along the wattle for any draft that suggests a gap has opened. You bank the fire, covering the embers with ash, watching the glow fade to the faintest pulse of heat. You lie down upon the straw that has shaped itself to your form over months of use, pulling the blanket over you, feeling the weight of it settle, hearing the sounds of your family finding their own positions, the animals beyond the partition settling into their standing rest, the wind moving through the thatch above, the distant sounds of the night beginning their nocturnal symphony. You close your eyes to a darkness that is nearly absolute, and you allow your breathing to slow, matching it to the rhythm of the world around you, the slow cycles of the farm, the seasons, the agricultural year that has structured human life since the first seeds were planted in prepared soil. The straw beneath you rustles slightly as you shift to find the position that will allow the deepest rest, the position you have found 1,000 times before, and will find 1,000 times again. The smell of the cottage surrounds you, the smoke and the straw and the animals and the earth, the smell of survival, of persistence, of the quiet dignity of those who work the land and accept what it provides without demanding more than it can give. You feel the warmth building under the wool blanket, the contrast between the protected space of your bed and the cold air of the cottage interior, the knowledge that you are safe, that the walls will stand, that the roof will hold, that the morning will come with its demands and its possibilities. Sleep comes not as a sudden departure from consciousness, but as a gradual fading, a dissolution of the boundary between self and world, between the thoughts of the day and the dreams of the night. You drift on the edge of awareness for what might be minutes or might be hours, time having lost its precision in the absence of light and the presence of exhaustion. The last thing you are aware of is the sound of your own breathing, slow and regular, merging with the breathing of those who sleep near you, with the larger breathing of the world itself, as it moves through the darkness toward the dawn that will come, whether you wake to greet it or not. And then you are gone, sunk into the straw, into the darkness, into the ancient rhythm of farm life that knows nothing of progress or history, only of the eternal present of work and rest, of waking and sleeping, of the body doing what it must do to survive another day, another season, another year, and the quiet desperation and quiet peace of the medieval farm.